Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Metropolitan Republican Club webinar series. My name is Krisha Lenzo, and this is Kelly Lynch. And on behalf of the Met Club board, we're excited to have you join us. And as a reminder, we have a donation link in our live chat, and we hope you'll consider making a contribution to help support our club during this critical 2020 election cycle.
And tonight, it is a great honor and privilege to welcome Judge Ken Starr. Kenneth Winston Starr is an American lawyer who served as a United States Circuit Court judge and the 39th Solicitor General of the United States. He is best known for heading an investigation of members of the Clinton administration known as the Whitewater Controversy, which eventually led to the impeachment of President William Jefferson Clinton and the 5-year suspension of Clinton's law license. On January 16, 2020, he became a member of President Donald J. Trump's legal team for his United States Senate impeachment trial. He argued successfully in the president's defense in the United States Senate. So our first question for tonight is, what are your thoughts on the Judge Amy Coney Barrett hearings and how relatively smoothly they went? Do you believe that she'll be confirmed before Election Day? And if so, what will her lasting impact on the court be?
I object. That was a multiple question. Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation. I love you guys. I wish we were in the city, but here we are. I'm thankful to be back with this wonderful, wonderful club. And remember very favorably our last time together, and we had a rip-roaring good time. So I hope, even though it's remote and all that, that we'll have a lively discussion. Yeah, it looks as if, I mean, it's just famous last words, but it's looking so good for Judge Barrett. But let me talk about her for a second. We all came to our own impressions, and we almost needed to have a national exercise. What is it that you like about Judge Amy Coney Barrett? And people write down 3 things or 4 things. And then, okay, we all have faults. Is there anything you don't like? Write those down. It'd be really hard to write that second, what is it that you don't like, unless it's just an ideological difference. But that same thing could have been said about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as we all know, we've heard this over and over again, was confirmed by the United States Senate by almost a unanimous vote. And that was after the Judge Bork imbroglio. Doesn't have to be the way that it was with Brett Kavanaugh. It doesn't have to be the way it was with Clarence Thomas. And so the very good news is, because of her many remarkable qualities, both professionally and personally, and I think everybody knows what those are. I don't have to repeat the obvious. I need to say one thing. I know her, but I've not had any professional relationship with her. I've admired her from afar, but I know her from a Notre Dame USC tailgate. I like sports, and I've got a lot of friends at Notre Dame. And so I probably spent 10 minutes with her maximum before Notre Dame defeated the Trojans of USC. I'm sorry, East Coast, that's the University of Southern California, not the University of But, you know, Notre Dame USC, it's a great rivalry. And the very fact, by the way, that she won, and the many contributions, the contributions that she's made, her many accomplishments, to me, as a teacher from time to time, but someone who loves the academy, who loves the classroom, who loves students, that she won, and this apparently is unprecedented at Notre Dame, at least in modern time, 3 times the Best Teacher Award. I know that faculty. It's a superb teaching faculty. It's a great research faculty and all that. And all the while doing what she did as a mom, right? The 7 children, Jesse, the division of labor and so forth. And what a great tribute to America that she grows up, you know, not in privation, but she grows up in Metairie, Louisiana, New Orleans. She goes off to a not famous school. So she's not an Ivy Leaguer, Rhodes College, which is a very fine liberal arts college in Memphis, and then off to Notre Dame, where she really excelled. So here's another fact that didn't get a lot of attention. We heard the same thing over and over again. Oh, you did this and you did that. Here's another thing. One of the most distinguished members of the federal judiciary in our time is Lawrence Silberman. And Judge Silberman, with whom I was privileged to serve when I was on the DC Circuit, is a brilliant judge, but he's a tough judge. And he can be, shall I say, very demanding. He demands the best of himself, and he demands the best of others. Richly experienced, great academic record, the Harvard Law School, Dartmouth College, all that sort of thing. But more than that, he had such a wide range of experiences, both in private life as a leading lawyer, as a general counsel of a major bank, which our New York brothers and sisters can relate to. Oh, that's serious business, right? And then for this last really generation, appointed by Ronald Reagan to serve on the DC Circuit, Amy Coney Barrett from Notre Dame, not from the Ivy League, is one of Judge Silberman's very favorite law clerks, not based on personality, but based on her performance. And we know that Justice Antonin Scalia not only chose her, but loved her. We've heard so many tributes to her by the family in terms of her abilities, but also her niceness. And the final thing that I want to say in terms about her extraordinary record is the tribute by someone who doesn't agree with her. I think everybody now knows it. I'll just summarize it. Professor Noah Feldman, previously of NYU, down the way from us, where you all may be gathered together, down around Washington Square. And Noah, now and for many years at the Harvard Law School, sang her praises in that remarkable outpouring, saying, he doesn't agree with her, etc. So she's on her way. The last poll, and I hate to even cite a poll, but welcome to a democracy, 51% of Americans now support her confirmation. Well, that's extraordinary. You might say, well, boy, that's just bare. Yes, but that's higher than the numbers of Neil Gorsuch and higher than the numbers of Brett Kavanaugh, both of whom I greatly admire. So we've seen this, and the trajectory has been only one way. The more, remember the song from The King and I, Getting to Know You, Getting to Know All About You? As the American people got to know her, getting to know all about her, and the fact that I think overall the confirmation hearings were conducted with dignity, tremendous ability and performance by Lindsey Graham. 3 cheers for Lindsey Graham and the way he conducted things, and he was fair, and the symbolism of the way the hearings went, and I think the way the vote will end up going, hopefully with no Republican losses, but it seems given the 53 Republicans in the majority, even with the loss of 1 or 2, she should still be okay. But I thought the symbolism of Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, the ranking minority person, hugging Chairman Lindsey Graham, who is apparently in the fight for his political life in South Carolina, at the end of the hearings, and Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois praising the conduct of the hearings, was, to me, it was a good thing for the country. So we lament the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but we should all be applauding the now elevation of Amy Coney Barrett.
Definitely. And for Kelly and I, especially, we view her as a role model for young women as well. And we're excited to talk to you more about her positions. Some of the objections, though, have been that a lot of the Democrats brought up the fact that Roe v. Wade or the Affordable Care Act could potentially be overturned during her tenure on the court. Is this realistic in your view? And do you think this would be possible if she does reach the high court?
Well, anything is possible in terms of a judicial reading the briefs and considering it. And one of the things, one of her themes, as you heard, was open-mindedness. That's not just a good thing, it's an indispensable thing for a judge to be true to his or her oath. If you have taken an oath, as she has, and hopefully she will take the judicial oath again to do equal justice to the poor and to the rich, what that, of course, entails is setting aside as best you can. It's hard, but to set aside as best you can your own predilections. So I have no doubt in my mind that she thinks Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. She has reservations, and this was articulated time and again with Chief Justice Roberts' analysis of the mandate, the tax versus the non-tax and so forth. But I think it's perilous, I really do, to predict in advance what she would do. One of the things she said, and more than once, was, I have respect for precedent, what we lawyers and judges call stare decisis, sort of stay the course. And she talked about reliance interests. So whether one agrees with Roe v. Wade, I don't. I'm unabashedly pro-life, but that's the policy position. But in terms of the jurisprudence, Roe v. Wade was a very poorly reasoned. You might like the result, but you shouldn't like the reasoning. Not even Ruth Ginsburg applauded the reasoning in her famous lecture at NYU, the James Madison lecture, appropriately enough, criticizing Roe v. Wade. So people just disagree over the policy. And so in light of her fidelity to the Catholic faith and Catholic teaching and so forth, who can doubt, just as Scalia, the other wonderful justices who are members of the Catholic Church and serious members of the Catholic Church, I don't think we should have any doubt that she would be pro-life. And Lindsey Graham said that. Isn't it nice that we're having a woman who is a pro-life going on the court, but it doesn't necessarily translate into how she will vote. Anthony Kennedy, very faithful Catholic. I have every reason to believe that Sandra Day O'Connor thought Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. I don't know about David Souter, but they said stare decisis, and my goodness, that was in 1992. It's 28 years after that. So now on the Affordable Care Act, just a very brief comment.
Sure.
I don't think this is a serious challenge, the current challenge mounted by my home state of Texas. I happen to be helping taking care of grandchildren in Florida right now, but I'm from Texas and I watch the litigation unfold. And whatever you think of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, I just don't think it's a tough issue for the court to say, no, Congress would not want to throw the whole thing out. You might, as a policy matter, want to throw the whole thing out and start over again with a more market-based approach. That certainly would be my policy preference. I like markets and like a choice in the marketplace and so forth, but that's a policy choice. But what did Congress want? Did it want, if the mandate goes, for the entire House, as it were, to fall? And as I've studied the case, I'm not an expert on the case, but as I've studied the case, I just don't think that's likely to carry the day. If she is confirmed, I'm going to go ahead and hazard a vote. I guess I'll buy drinks at the Algonquin if it goes the wrong way for everybody. Boy, that could get expensive.
That could get expensive.
7-2, right? With her joining in, not severing. I think Justice Thomas and Justice Gorsuch may very well vote to throw the whole thing out, given their view on the issue of severability, as we call that doctrine in the law.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out and if those cases end up coming up in the coming years. And in terms of the Supreme Court, do you think that court packing, obviously a hot button topic these days,
Right.
the election coming up, do you think that that's a realistic possibility under the Biden administration, and how would that end up being implemented?
Yeah, I hope not. And I think it will end up being a DOA, dead on arrival. But the culture changed, the politics has changed. We can't sit back and simply say, oh, it's going to go nowhere because look at the FDR example in 1937. But I think that lesson from history is helpful and it's illuminating because the underlying lesson is even if the even if the American people are at odds with the approach of the Supreme Court of the United States. And that was true in 1937. But it's not true now. The nation is divided. But unless the nation is so upset with the Supreme Court of the United States, the good common sense of the American people will be to the effect, look, no, we don't trifle with these great institutions. We've had 9 members since 1869. There's a reason for that. It's a good number so that it really is a collegial deliberative body. It doesn't mean everybody agrees, but it's a collegial deliberative body more in the nature of a court as opposed to a legislative committee. But heaven help us, the Congress could do it by a majority vote of both houses and be signed into law. If the heavens have fallen and we find ourselves in the spring of 2021 with this being seriously bandied about and the Jacobins in the House of Representatives carry the day, so AOC gets her will and so on and so forth. If that were to happen and the Senate didn't come to its more sober judgment on reflection, I'll bet you Joe Biden will veto it. How about that for a prediction? But I don't think it'll it might pass out of the House. I don't think it's going to pass out of the Senate. We've already had Democrats on the minority side, on the Democratic side of the aisle, expressing reservations.
Switching topics a little bit to one that we've seen in some of the headlines this week, although we wish more outlets would cover it. What is your opinion on the Hunter Biden laptop revelation and the surrounding FBI investigation? How realistic is it for a special prosecutor to be appointed by AG Barr with less than 2 weeks right before the election?
Right. I don't think it's realistic, but I take it very seriously from what I have read. And I know our friends in the quote mainstream media just are turning a blind eye, which is unfortunate because they should all be truth seekers. I thought you won Pulitzer Prizes and wrote best-selling books by being a real truth seeker and reporting on it in the newspapers and then again writing your book. But we're in this so polarized, and we all know that. So it's hackneyed to even mention it. It should be investigated because these are serious allegations. And the idea that this is Russian disinformation should be checked out. From what I've seen, it's not. And thus, let's have a serious look at it. Now, that having been said, I think the president, his position is understandable. Name a special prosecutor. But to do that 2 weeks before the election, I think, frankly, is unwise. So I'm prepared to be roundly criticized for that. But let's just remember, James Comey's name lives in infamy and should for any number of reasons. But one of them is he arrogated power to himself and sought to interfere, in effect, with the election in 2016. Did it hurt Hillary? If it hurt her, how much did it hurt? Let the political people, he should not have done that. And it is part of the great traditions of the Justice Department that the Justice Department does not take action that could have a reasonably foreseeable political effect in the election season. So I think these revelations came too late for that. But you know, there are other reporters on the beat. Remember, you're too young. I saw it. Watergate was originally broken by who? It wasn't broken by a special prosecutor. It wasn't Archibald Cox. It was broken by reporters for the Washington Post, famously, and it was broken by the Senate inquiry. So we still have, even if the election doesn't go the way so many of us would like, we still have some weeks left, obviously, before It's October, for Pete's sake, before January.
Well, that's definitely a good perspective, that even if things don't go as we would like them to in 2 weeks, that there still would be some time to maybe get to the bottom of this
Yes.
while President Trump is still in office. And going off that, do you think that in the past year with the FBI investigation, that this could have come to light sooner or been passed along to Congress? Like, what's your take on the timeline?
Absolutely. There appears to be, from my understanding of the timeline, a huge failure at the FBI, because this Delaware store owner informed the FBI. I assume the Wilmington field office of the FBI. I have not seen reports about what the FBI field office did. God bless them. The FBI agents who I've worked with, there are thousands of them. They're people of real integrity, but even people of integrity can just fail to do the job or see the importance and relevance of something. But that's the tragedy, right? The tragedy in terms of truth finding about this is that that computer, the contents, were in the possession of the FBI for many months.
Another tragedy could also be that there's been such a great amount of censorship with respect to this story even coming out. Obviously, Section 230 has been debated and by both sides saying that it should be repealed. But can you think of any legal way that social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter can be prevented from participating in this censorship, which even Jack Dorsey admitted he misstepped in this regard?
Yeah, we have a huge reckoning, and Jack and Twitter have, as it were, figuratively speaking, blood on their hands. Mm-hmm. How dare they do what they did? And so let's overcome it. But by golly, right there in New York, maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, but the New York Post was putting this out. Mm-hmm. There it is. So. And here, I was looking at these reports. Here are quotations. Now, are they, emails, text messages, and so forth? Now, are they made up? Are they contrived? Or are they phony and false? Well, that's where the experts at the FBI and others come in. But God bless the media outlets, and thank goodness we of the New York Post, the print media, but thank goodness we also have a lot of truth seekers. I mean, when I start thinking of the people in Washington, D.C., and I'm just going to go ahead and name one of my very favorites, Byron York. He is absolutely fantastic. You're on Andy McCarthy in New York. He is absolutely fantastic. And Andy has written on this in recent days. So we have serious, highly professional people who are willing to just, whatever their politics, on the right, okay, but whatever their politics, they don't bend and twist and manipulate the facts. They maintain integrity. And so we do have those outlets. You can only wish, gosh, why isn't this on the other platforms? And there's no excuse for it. No excuse whatsoever. It is moral cowardice and professional malfeasance. Pretty strong words, but I feel it pretty strongly about what's happened to America's media. But nothing new about that. We all, I think everyone participating in this tonight would say, yeah, the media in the United States is no longer filled with truth seekers. You say, well, this is make-believe, you're hallucinating. No, I'm not. Because back during Whitewater, yes, Whitewater, that was in the lifetime of many people who are participating tonight. During Whitewater, the lead investigative reporter was from the New York Times, Jeff Gerth, Pulitzer Prize winner. His understudy, Steve Labaton, New York Times. Over at the Washington Post, Sue Schmidt. She never won a Pulitzer, but she deserved it. I could keep going. NBC News, Lisa Myers, who broke the Juanita Broderick story, which NBC wouldn't run. They finally had to run it. So the bias of people in the chief offices, shall I say, really affects and I'm sure trickles down to the reporters, quote, on the beat. But there may be more fact-finding going on, and we just don't know whether that's just not being reported because we just don't do that here. Fill in the blank at the New York Times. In short, where is Jeff, Girth, and those of his progeny who really were truth seekers? And I have no idea what Jeff Girth's politics are. It doesn't matter, right? Let's get to the truth, and then people can come to their own assessments as to the significance of the truth.
I totally agree. And I think that the censorship that's gone on, it's only gotten worse with each passing year, especially exacerbated by social media. So we'll just have to see how it plays out, and hopefully some more truth seekers will come to light. But you mentioned Whitewater, and another question we wanted to ask was, how did you feel the Mueller investigation was conducted in comparison to your investigation of President Clinton in the 90s?
I have great admiration for Bob Mueller, but I do not admire the appointment, the way the appointment was done by someone who I also greatly admire, Rod Rosenstein. And I was, the more I learn about the Mueller report, the more disappointed I am in Bob Mueller. I think he showed very poor judgment in his choice of senior staff. I could start naming names, but everybody knows who we're talking about. And the bias, and the more that comes out with respect to what this FBI agent saw and that FBI agent saw. Agent Barnett is a recent one saying, having worked inside the Mueller probe, that the attitude was get Trump, not get the truth. Isn't that awful? And then I've been very harsh in my condemnation of the Mueller report. I felt it was completely wrong as a matter of law, as a matter of decency. Law, because all Bob Mueller was called upon to do under the regulations under which he was appointed was to provide the Attorney General with an explanation of why prosecutions were brought and then why prosecutions were not brought. That 400 pages was essentially a call for the impeachment of the President of the United States. And I was stunned when I read and I studied that report. I'm a Fox News contributor, so they kept asking me questions about their report, and the fact that there was no collusion was frankly evident in the report. Here's one example. In the report itself, there is the following, and obviously this is pretty classified or whatever, sensitive intelligence, that Vladimir Putin, after the election, called a meeting of some of the rich oligarchs around him and posed the question. This is in the report. We don't know this guy. We have no connections to Donald Trump. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. How do we connect? Gosh, they thought Hillary was going to win, of course. So doesn't that tell you that if they had no chits, there's no Vladimir Putin saying, well, we made sure that he won the election and now it's time for him to pay the piper in the Kremlin, and that's me. There's nothing like that. So there are what I call contraindications of any sort of collusion. He should have just said it flat out, as opposed to the evidence did not show. So it was a grudging determination of no collusion. And then the obstruction idea, I thought, was absolutely, not even Mitt Romney was willing to go with the idea of obstruction, even though he did have the view that the call itself to the President Zelensky was wrong, et cetera, and felt that that case was proven. I disagreed with that, obviously. But I continue to be very agitated about the Bob Mueller report. And then finally, as we recall, a year ago in July, Bob, and I served alongside him under President Bush 41, and just have great affection for him and so forth. That was not the Bob Mueller I knew. It's very halting, and I think the Wall Street Journal said editorially embarrassing. So whatever had happened had happened. He certainly was not at the top of his game. He was not the Bob Mueller of old. So deeply disappointed. So by the way, it's one of the reasons that, and on Mother's Day of 2017, on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, I said that we don't need more of these special counsels. There are problems. As I recall my own episode, I think we conducted our investigation with integrity, with 14 criminal convictions, and those were real convictions of real people, not like General Flynn. That's another quarrel I have with the Mueller approach, not just the Mueller report. But independent counsels and special counsels build in their own set of issues, becomes very politicized, keep it in the Justice Department. So for those many reasons, I'm not a fan, ironically, of special counsels. But I wasn't a fan when I was serving in the Reagan administration as Chief of Staff to the Attorney General when we urged Congress not to reauthorize the independent counsel statute, but Congress went ahead and did so.
What was your experience like being part of President Trump's legal team for his impeachment trial, and how did you feel that his trial was conducted compared to President Clinton's?
Yeah, it was awfully narrow for starters. And the idea that the president committed an impeachable act by his conversation with President Zelensky, I thought was far-fetched. And it had become, the situation had become so, what shall I say, extreme. We had no regular order. The impeachment inquiry was not voted on by the House of Representatives. The Speaker had the raw power to do it, and she did it, but that's not our tradition. We did not elect Nancy Pelosi. Only people in San Francisco voted for her to begin with, to get her in the door. And then essentially House Democrats said, "You're now our Speaker." All right, fair enough. But you don't have the power to launch an inquiry into impeachment. Now, notice that in contrast, and this is part of the argument that I was trying to make on the floor of the Senate, that if impeachment is entirely partisan matter, then it is doomed to fail and it's going to hurt the country. And that was this impeachment. Criticize the president all that you want for his style, the judgment that he exercised in making that call to President Zelensky, fair comment, have an oversight hearing. But the idea, again, that that's an impeachable offense just taught me, and this is my basic point in the floor of the Senate, we need to restore the traditions in the United States, including in the House of Representatives, where impeachment is an act of last resort, not a first resort. But that's where we are now in our history. So let's just assume, for purposes of this discussion, that Joe Biden is elected, if the polls are to be believed. And then let's assume that in 2022, the Republicans have their wave election and they resume control, they take control, right? Same thing, same kind of pattern. It's happened time and time again. I would hope that the Republicans would not say it's payback time. Joe, we're now opening up an impeachment inquiry into Hunter Biden and all the rest of it. Let's stop impeaching the president of the United States, save for the most extreme circumstances. And what are those? Richard Milhouse Nixon. Those were extreme circumstances. When you look at the record, you can understand why it was that the vote for the House of Representatives to authorize the impeachment inquiry was 410 to 20 or something like that. Think of that. Practically unanimous by the House of the People's House that we must have an impeachment inquiry.
Definitely. It's definitely become a lot more partisan in the past 50 years since the Nixon administration. So I think we're going to have to see how things go. But definitely it would be interesting to see what happens in 2022 if things play out, as you said, with a Biden presidency and then Republicans taking the House. But going off that, in terms of Hunter Biden's laptop again, if the FBI had released his laptop, or if it had become public back in 2019, obviously a lot of the documents that are relevant on it were about Burisma, which directly related to President Trump's phone call. How do you think that would have played into the Senate trial and to your defense?
Yeah, I don't think that that would have had a significant effect. I may be wrong. I frequently am. But that's a very intriguing way of thinking about it, that if all those facts had come out, it certainly would have helped explain why the president would call and would have perhaps moderated. The subject would have changed, right? Instead of you're pressuring him to investigate and there's no there, as Gertrude Stein famously said of Oakland. So it might have softened it and changed the subject, the spotlight onto Joe Biden. And had it come out, it is very, very conceivable that Joe Biden would not be the nominee if some of the things that are being said, and it's a very big if some of those things now being said and suggested are in fact true. Did Joe Biden personally profit? Did Joe Biden otherwise take specific kinds of actions, including having that meeting, the White House, strike that, but not at the White House, but an official meeting on that particular day where, oh no, the records of his diary do not show any such meeting. But as I understand it, you see where I'm going. I'm in the woods here. I'm the losing side of the forest. But let me just finish the point. What if he actually had that meeting that Hunter had, in fact, arranged with Burisma officials in Washington, D.C., and then some sort of, shall I use the term, quid pro quo? Remember how frequently we heard that at this time last year? Quid pro quo. Well, that's the most corrupt kind of quid pro quo, right? That's a Spiro Agnew quid pro quo, if that happened. So these are serious allegations, exactly right. Let's get to the bottom of it. And it could have had an effect. There's no question. It could have had an effect on the impeachment process.
So we are now less than 2 weeks away from Election Day. Do you think that the 2020 election will end up being decided by the Supreme Court as the 2000 election was? And if so, what might that legal process look like?
Yeah, let's hope and pray not. Let's all vote and vote honestly, vote with integrity and count the votes with integrity and so forth. But we now know the nation is closely divided. The polls 4 years ago woefully underestimated President Trump's support. And there apparently is fear in the Biden campaign that there's that sort of hidden support that will come out and bite them and allow the president to win re-election. We have every reason to believe that but for COVID-19 and the criticisms of the presidents, whether well-founded or not, people will have their own views of the COVID-19 pandemic. He should have easily won re-election. Remember James Carville? You're too young to remember, but in 1992, it's the economy, stupid. The irony right now is the polls are showing that a substantial majority of the American people approve of President Trump's handling of the economy. Will that be the hidden factor, the sort of X factor that allows him once again to snatch victory from this jaws seemingly of defeat? And the other thing is, I think that the debate actually may be more important than I realize we only had one, but the final debate usually is, because I think people are just, they're wondering, is Joe Biden up to it, right? Is this a sort of Potemkin village presidency, and that we're really electing Kamala Harris, which is not, to many people outside California, a particularly attractive thing, because look how she did in the primaries. She failed miserably in the primaries in her own party. So the enthusiasm doesn't seem to be there for Kamala, but we're perhaps electing her, right? This isn't 1992. Elect Bill Clinton and you get a Hillary as well, the co-presidency. They're not talking about that, but I think there are genuine concerns on the part of many people who might say, I don't like President Trump's style, his tweets. I wish he'd be a nice person to people, quit insulting, all that whole narrative. We talked about that over a year ago in New York. But he is who he is, but look at the results he gets. And the results he gets, I think, are conservative results. I don't like the debt. There's no question. I don't think the president is nearly as keen on watching the kind of money that we're indebted to. That's a criticism. But when I think of what he has taught the country, and I viewed him with skepticism, I really did 4 years ago. I voted for him, but I viewed him with skepticism. I didn't think that he was a conservative. But whatever he is in his heart of hearts, look at results. It's the results, stupid. And at every turn, including on foreign policy, he taught me a lot about these endless wars. And as someone who works a lot on issues of religious liberty, I am in a state of sorrowful repentance that I didn't assess what would happen in places like Iraq with the destruction essentially of Christianity. I grieve over the destruction of Christianity in the Middle East. Why did that happen? Because of the destabilization wrought by our determination, which I supported, that Saddam has got to go. So easy to second guess, but the president was right about that. He was right about NATO. You've got to pay your fair share. Someone once told me, I said, I wish he would be nicer to our NATO allies. I'm kind of in the Bush camp. Be nice to people, right? Write them notes. show some decency. And said, no, Ken, it's very simple. I said, well, what's simple about it? He said, he's a landlord and these are tenants and they're behind in their rent. You don't send them love notes. But so I'm talking about Angela Merkel and all of the allies who are now inching toward paying their fair share. So in any event, Jerusalem, shall I say that? I love Israel. And I'm so applauded because it's been U.S. policy forever that the capital should be in Jerusalem. And I love our Arab brothers and sisters and colleagues, but this was the right thing to do. And so on issue after issue, President Trump has, I think, taught the country of the importance of courage and frankly, a little bit of audacity. But we'll see. He may not be wearing well with suburban women, as he said the other night.
I totally agree. And I think that all of those accomplishments that you mentioned are often overlooked by the mainstream media, but I hope that the American people are focusing on the results in 2 weeks on November 3rd. So we'll just have to cross our fingers and wait and see. But Going off that.
And for those listening, excuse me, I did not mention that I think it's very important that it just gets over deregulation, how vitally important that was to economic prosperity that we enjoyed until the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sorry, I interrupted. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. I think deregulation has also been a major accomplishment of President Trump's as well. And going off that, if we end up not doing well on election day and the Democrats gain power, do you think it's realistically possible for them to abolish the Electoral College? Obviously, that's something we've been hearing about since the start of President Trump's presidency. And how would that work without a constitutional amendment?
It can't. I know there are gimmicks and so forth, but in terms of the abolition of the Electoral College, the gimmick would be we as a state vote that our electors, there's a bit of a movement, will vote in favor of whoever wins, right, the national, the plebiscite, so to speak. But we are the United States of America, and that's what the Electoral College is designed to reflect and protect. And until we just say, we're not the United States, we're all just Americans, period. No, we're also New Yorkers and Texans and Californians and so forth. And that Louis Brandeis so elegantly described the laboratory of the states, how important it is, especially in a vast continental constitutional republic, to have different kinds of experiments, right? Social experiments, economic experiments, and so forth, and to encourage that kind of grassroots creativity, including at the local level. That's what the Electoral College entails, and that will take a constitutional amendment. And needless to say, South Dakota ain't going to vote in favor of it, right? And it's going to take a 3/4 majority of the states to enact that amendment. So I view it as a political debating point.
So we'll turn it over now to some of the questions that were submitted by our audience in advance and also live. There's a question that asked, Senator Hirono of Hawaii asked Judge Coney Barrett if she's ever committed sexual assault. Is that the line of questioning that's indicative of what future female conservative judges will face?
Yeah, it was an outrageous question because there was nothing, I gather, in the FBI file to suggest that. I thought it was the intentional infliction of emotional distress. We call that a tort.
Yes.
In the law. And even though it was asked in a very gentle, and she has this very gentle voice, I was utterly appalled. I viewed it as completely outside the bounds of reason and human decency. She should be roundly criticized by her own people. But has anyone peeped up? No. And the other thing is, remember, and Lindsey Graham was very gracious about this, that she is a recent cancer survivor. So there's that, shall I say, intangible factor that may go into, but if you just say, on its merits, was this an appropriate question to ask? The answer is emphatically not. It was an inhumane and indecent question to ask without any predication whatsoever.
We totally agree. And another question that we have from the audience is, now with the distance of over 20 years, what is the most important, in your opinions, from the Whitewater scandal that you think Americans should remember and take away from that moment in history?
The importance of the rule of law and that no person is above the law. My many critics said, oh, you went after the president just because of your puritanical zealotry, which is absolutely false. It's knowingly and deliberately false, or else it's just willful blindness. We couldn't have been clearer. The president committed perjury, and he essentially conceded that he did. The president also committed various acts of obstruction of justice. Those are serious. And when the Supreme Court of the United States, outside the cauldron of impeachment and politics, faced square on the question, should the president be immune from a civil lawsuit, Clinton versus Jones, Should the president be immune from a civil lawsuit? The United States Supreme Court held 9-0, 9-0, that the president was not above the law. That's the abiding lesson. Not even the president. And isn't that reassuring? In light of what we see in China, in light of what we see in Russia, in light of what we're seeing unfold in so many countries in the world, with dictatorships on the rise and the like. Welcome to America, the land of the free, but it's also freedom under law, or what Justice Benjamin Cardozo so eloquently from New York called ordered liberty. It's not liberty to do anything that you want. It is ordered liberty, ordered by law, ordered by morality, and so forth. So it's the rule of law. And this is so sacred in our traditions. Going back to Magna Carta, where King John, who said to the barons, I, John, am a Christian king and I'm under God. That was, of course, the culture of the time, not very diverse, heterogeneous in terms of faith commitments. I, John, am a Christian king and I'm under God. But the barons, of course, at Runnymede were successful in getting King John to concede, I'm also under the law of this realm. I too am subject to the law. That is so fundamental. Magna Carta, the great charter, has carried the English-speaking world through thick and through thin. And we should always lift up the idea that we have to obey the law, or else then, as Martin Luther King Jr. did so eloquently from his letter from the Birmingham jailers, here is why I'm being civilly disobedient. I recognize the law, but the law is unjust. I will accept the consequences of my violation of an unjust law and therefore appeal to the higher morality of the people.
Speaking of disorderly conduct and not really falling in line with the acts of people who go about civil disobedience, what is your assessment right now of Antifa?
Oh, terrible. Utterly lawless, violent. So I hope that investigations are, as I understand it, I'm way on the outside, investigations and then prosecutions will be underway. And I hope that would continue even in, it will certainly continue in a Trump second term. I would hope that Joe Biden, a lawyer, would, shall I say, come to his senses and condemn this kind of illegal activity and take the appropriate actions, or direct the Attorney General and the United States attorneys and the FBI to go after these people.
We definitely hope that that would happen, but we'll just have to see how the events play out in the coming months and years. And another question that we had was, can you think that the censorship that took place on Facebook and Twitter with the Hunter Biden story, could that be considered an in-kind contribution to the Biden campaign violating campaign finance laws, as Senator Josh Hawley suggested?
Yeah, I saw that, and frankly, it's a serious enough question to look at, but I have to confess, I'm not an election law lawyer. I've dabbled in the area, so I would have to defer, I really would, to others. I would hope that would be looked at in terms of whether it is, but I have an instinct that it's not going to be seen that way under a better view of the law. But that having been said, if it is, great, go after them. But isn't that absolutely, it's once again, I'm going to use a strong word, appalling that there would be this kind of censorship. And the result is, I think that increasingly we'll see the elections have consequences, but Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, which provides this immunity, is clearly being closely examined in terms of whether that represents sound public policy. I think it's extreme, excessive in light of the control, as evidenced by the fact that now the United States, the Justice Department, is going against Google for monopolization. And believe me, doesn't mean they're going to succeed, but a case like that is not mounted without the most elaborate kind of factual development and investigation. So these are serious policy and legal questions with respect to these platforms. But the censorship is just, again, to me, that is the unforgivable sin. Allow the conversation to unfold and for the truth to come out, or different visions of the truth to come out, and then allow the people to decide. That's the great Holmesian idea of the battle of the marketplace of ideas, which, of course, is what our First Amendment culture should be all about.
You worked on President Trump's legal defense against the impeachment. And when you look back on that, what was going through your mind at that moment, especially your thoughts about the state of American politics?
Yeah, what was going through my mind is that we need to, slightly echoing what I said a few minutes ago, we need to come out of this, what I decided to call the age of impeachment. That for our first 2 centuries, impeachment was that very rarely used tool. Was it misused against Andrew Johnson in the 1860s? A strong argument can be made that it was misused, that it was politics. But at least those were politics having to do with the most serious kind of issues. And that was, of course, Reconstruction in the South and the rule of law in the South. And I must say, in my study as an amateur, but eager and avid amateur historian, I must say, Andrew Johnson was a pretty despicable guy in terms of the way he was conducting U.S. policy, law enforcement in the reconstructed South, or the South undergoing Reconstruction. But that was ultimately, it seemed to me, a policy dispute. And what we do know is the ground on which he was actually impeached, namely his violation of the Tenure of Office Act by his dismissal of Secretary of War, we would say Defense Edwin Stanton, was really constitutionally very dubious. So it did not have, it being impeachment, did not have a great start. But note, that was in the 1860s. We had been a republic for almost 80 years when that was utilized. And think of the number of presidents, and highly controversial presidents. Think of Andrew Jackson, for Pete's sake, who could be lawless at times. And Henry Clay, his nemesis, as Speaker of the House, knew that what General Jackson, President Jackson, was doing from time to time was absolutely illegal. But he never pulled the trigger on impeachment, never pulled that trigger. And to jump all the way to President Trump, Nancy Pelosi refused to pull the trigger month after month after month. That is what is so revealing about this, because those resolutions were being introduced quite frequently, over 20 resolutions calling in the House of Representatives, calling for President Trump's impeachment on numerous grounds: violation of the Emoluments Clause, etc., abuse of power. But Nancy Pelosi held the line. So one day the book will be written as to why did she give in September, right, of 2018, right? Am I getting my dates right there? With elections and so forth, but she did. She said, I've got to go with, essentially, I'm assuming that she said, I've got to go with AOC. I've got to go with the most left-wing radical part of the Democratic Party. And I think the nation was impoverished. But notice, the nation stopped paying attention to it, right? Mm-hmm. I just regret, I'm going to add this. I regret that no Democrat came forward to vote no on either of the articles. And they knew that Article 2 was founded on sand. Could reasonable people differ about Article 1, which was the so-called quid pro quo? Let's concede that. But some Democrats should have, had they had the courage of their conviction to do the right thing, to join Mitt Romney in saying, absolutely not for Article 2. But it just shows, once again, the deep politicization of the impeachment process.
Definitely, and that really showed how partisan Congress and the Senate in particular have become in recent years, especially with the ascendance of AOC and the squad. Going back to the Supreme Court, with Amy Coney Barrett on the court, assuming that she's confirmed, do you think that that would move Justice Roberts more towards an originalist interpretation of the Constitution?
I can't predict, but a lot of the criticisms of Chief Justice Roberts go to his votes, including recently in the Pennsylvania voting situation, several of his votes in the church closure situations, on cases that are coming up on an emergency basis, seeking emergency relief. So let me just say, let me stick with the church situation. We don't know what he's going to do if we have Bush v. Gore all over again, right? And so it's Trump v. Biden or Biden versus Trump. What I have seen is the Chief Justice has stood firm on issues, I'm talking about church closures, of religious liberty 3 times in very important cases, including writing a very important case, pro-religious liberty, which was 5-4 this last term, called Espinoza versus Montana. And in that case, the chief gave full-throated support for a great and robust vision of religious liberty. He seems to shy away from using the emergency powers to grant temporary relief, and that may be entirely for prudential reasons. And what are those reasons? The case has not been fully briefed. The record hasn't been developed. It's coming up on papers and so forth. There's been no trial and so forth. So I think people should, hold their fire a little bit about Chief Justice Roberts, because I think he is very much an originalist himself. You can just disagree with his votes from time to time, including in Obamacare. I've written a long article in the Washington Examiner, not just about this, but just about the dynamics as I see them on the court. And what I see is a Chief Justice in his voting on the merits that is quite conservative, but there are times when I think, to protect the institution, as he sees it, of the court, that he will vote in ways that I think he doesn't even agree with. You might say, well, that sounds unprincipled. It may sound unprincipled, but he's seeking, I think, to protect what he sees as the institutional long-term interests of the court in the spirit of Chief Justice Marshall. Final point on this, because we're getting deep into law school stuff, Constitutional Law 101. And here is the point. Chief Justice Marshall, we know, the great Chief Justice, voted in ways that he did not agree with in order to present a united front. You say, well, that was 200 plus years ago, Ken. We don't need that now. That's an argument, but in a highly polarized time, I do not know, that Chief Justice Roberts is being very sensitive to the institutional perspective of the court and to protect it as an institution from the great winds and the howling winds of politics blowing about. But look at his record on the merits as opposed to some of these, shall I say, efforts to seek emergency relief.
Ken Starr, we want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. Your insights were so valuable to our community, and on behalf of the Met Club, we really thank you and wish you could come to New York City. We'd love to have you join us in person.
I accept.
Yes. As soon as we're open, I mean, we've already had socially distanced events, but as soon as, things are, on the up and up, we look forward to that day and hope that the predictions that we all wish for come forth in the next 2 weeks.
Here, here. Well, God bless you. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. God bless you and take care, everyone. Have a great night and thank you for joining us.